at all.
Not at all. This doesn't
Danan
look.
is currently offline.
This doesn't look poorly upon me at all.
Wait, is Twitch back up, by the way? I'm guessing it is. Twitch was down earlier, too. Oh, yeah, it's back up.
All right, so
Same.
audio.
But different.
You're not eating too much of it.
Advanced audio properties.
I forget what that's from.
Audio monitoring. Oh,
You're
gotta
not live
restart.
right now, right?
No, we're going live here. We were live, and now we're going live here again. We had to go offline because the audio is fucked.
All right, now how about now is? Let's see.
We
if-
are live? Are we live?
We should be live, but it's not
It's taking a hot second.
taking a second. Oh shit, that was the other thing.
Enough for right now.
Oh fuck.
Agreed.
Oh, I think I may know. Hold on.
Mommy needs to
What's the other thing?
pour this in.
No, it's connected.
No,
No, it's connected. All right, this is really weird.
Good job. You don't need to eat the entire bowl.
Hi, Beth.
Sit in one bit.
Mark says hi.
Hi, Mark.
I keep forgetting that like whenever you say
She
hi to
says hi
people
back.
that are like not on camera, that you have headphones on. Why is it
Yeah.
not streaming? Why is it not streaming?
Well, good episode, Mark.
This is
Glad
great.
to catch you this week.
It's so.
Oh, there we go. We're live.
All right, audio
Nice.
sounds normal. Audio sounds normal.
So it was just a
OBS.
Twitch break thing.
OBS pooped. All right, great. We're good. We're good.
Yeah. Yep.
Are you ready?
It's
What?
just so unfair how nice your webcam is.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So this is the amalgamation of like.
But
all
I still blame Discord because when I watch streamers, I see they like, okay, look at it this way. My camera on my end
Yeah.
looks as good as, not as good, almost as good as your camera.
All right.
So I still blame Discord.
We will try moving. So I spent the $100 on Nitro. We'll switch. Which, by the way, this should be an ad for Nitro, but Nitro is sucking right now, Rickling. So we should switch to, I guess, Skype. Microsoft sounds really great.
I have no idea if Skype actually does any better. That's just what Gafford uses for his shit.
Yeah. Then we'll do that. The gaff. So okay.
Maybe you just can't send high fidelity video in real time
You can.
across the internet
It's
in
the-
2020.
It's the internet. Oh yeah, but there is like coronavirus and throttling internet speeds. But I don't think that's it. I legit think that this is pretty bad. So, anyways,
Why is my chat not showing? There we go. Oh wait. Oh yeah, you gotta remind me. We need to change the title before we go live.
okay.
Okay, and then let me change it now. What is this? Episode 1 or episode 0.5?
Sure.
Episode 0.1?
Point five.
0.5.
Let's have low expectations for this.
And then it's like 0.55 until we greenlight episode 1.
When you don't hear my air conditioning unit and we don't have audio issues and we actually start on time, then yeah, maybe that'll be
Yeah.
that'll be
Tags
the first
just. Oh wait, no, we're already in just chatting, so that works. Duh.
time. Duh.
All right, so we got all that. Now I run a 60-second ad break, right?
Are you
just
running
to
a ad
start?
break?
No, I'm not, but I should. Oh, did you see Zayakia?
Sam was watching the VOD of this, and he's like, "Yeah, I watched 3 ads in like the first like 10 minutes." So like, someone's
I
making
didn't do
money off
anything.
this.
I didn't do it. I'm excited for my dollar paycheck next week.
I'm glad Golden Guardians is monetizing in some way. That's good. Too soon.
I still make reasonable monthly off of this. Like
Really?
for the fact that I streamed for like 8 minutes. I think he is like 80% of that for sure.
Thanks, Kian. So first off, are you allowed to talk about any of the changes that are going on right now that are crazy?
I mean, there's nothing like like that's the problem. It's not interesting for you at least for the audience. Like my struggles are like, oh yeah, like obviously there's LCS going on and I'm like thinking and doing all that kind of stuff and like
Yeah.
we're going into week 9 and we're like we need the 2-0 to go to playoffs and that kind of stuff. I've just got other stuff compounding on top of it in the real world at the same time that coronavirus is happening, which is also some like really real world implications with I come from a very small town in Iowa with like a lot of it's a retirement community. It's like a town of like 10,000 people, but there's like 9 retirement homes. So imagine like 1 retirement home per 1,000 people, like that's how many, and like 17 churches. for again a town like you can drive through this town in less than 6 minutes. Like, through
And
the whole
imagine
town.
telling them not to go to church, not to socialize, and
Well,
stay.
yeah. Well, and on top of that, like America is overwhelmingly obese. Alcohol is very popular in Iowa, obviously, so immune system's already compromised. And then simultaneously, like it's still a pretty big smoking community.
Yeah.
So it's like literally every risk factor you possibly can have, all wrapped into one, and then you know everybody. Like you know literally everyone when you're there. So when something like this happens, you're just like, "Whoo, that's a lot at once."
Yeah, it's weird because it doesn't seem like it's like I don't know for the immediate. I think the immediate stuff for me is people are losing jobs. Like my friends are losing jobs, and it is.
Oh yeah, not even to mention that. I can't even fathom what that ends up feeling like for that town.
And then I saw one tweet of saying, it started off as like people losing jobs, but then like people like losing lives. And I think the lives part is much more of the older generation. And yes, obese, respiratory problems, and so yeah, your hometown, prime risk.
Yeah. By the way, B_Mathis, that's my stepdad.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So he's in the middle of all of what we're talking about right now.
So B Mathis, how is Iowa holding down?
They're very excited. Did you see what? Actually, we could talk about this. This is actually kind of cool. Did you see what NASCAR and them are doing?
I know that they're doing the E-League essentially, like version
What up,
of it.
Dodo?
Not E-League,
They're
but
basically just doing they're
doing
esports
esports,
version,
yeah.
right? Yeah, so they were already kind of embraced. That's what's funny. Like it looks like a cash grab where they're just like, oh, we canceled our events, so now we need to do some esports stuff. It's not really, if I'm being honest. They were already doing esports stuff. So NASCAR has like a lot of young racers who are in their late teens, early 20s, who are technically savvy, who use social media, that kind of stuff. So a lot of them already had really sick VR setups. Like that was just like a normal thing that was already happening across the whole racing space, not just NASCAR, like across the board. Formula One, everywhere was already getting interested and involved in this. And so it was actually very natural for them when their events got canceled and they saw an opportunity and they jumped on it, where they're just like, okay, let's keep doing races, but let's just do VR. Like we can actually do surprisingly high fidelity competitive races just over the internet. And then, like he's talking about right now in chat, World of Outlaws. So that's dirt racing. By the way, there's like, I'm not sure if do you know the racing world at all?
The dirt biking racing like world?
No, just racing, like contextual, like the how like there's like NASCAR, which is like the big public American thing.
I watched Ford versus Ferrari.
And then there's like Formula One, which is like the non-American racing thing.
Yeah.
And then like I don't even know how the best way to categorize it, but then there's like dirt racing, which is like you can go to like modifieds and sprint cars, but like it's a little weird because I guess that's probably more prevalent in like Australia. I don't know if Africa or if Asia have like prevalent racing communities. Like I'm not aware of them, but like Australia is like insanely relevant for racing.
Well, I'd imagine because
so
they have like
kind of funny.
vast land to be able to like have like crazy tracks and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, so they have tons of space for that kind of thing. But
what's the
it's interesting,
gumball race? Have you heard of that one?
I don't know it.
All right. If anyone in chat knows the gumball race, it's like through the desert, crazy. But anyways, so crazy times. How any updates within the changes of esports and Golden Guardians and just in general of your thoughts of, because as you were saying with not Formula One but with NASCAR, they're like, oh, we gotta do the esports thing. Like everyone's kind of like, let's do the virtual version of our sport. Yeah.
So obviously for League, it was a pretty natural transition, and especially for Golden Guardians, like obviously the Golden State Warriors has Golden State Warriors Esports, GSW Esports, which is obviously what is like the whole umbrella of our teams, which is League of Legends, which is NBA 2K, and then obviously our new expansion teams, which are like Apex, World of Warcraft, and the card gamers. What's interesting is like it was a pretty natural transition also for, I think, NBA 2K, for example, who had to not only cancel their actual season because they did compete physically in person every week in New York, but also the actual NBA season itself. has been postponed, and so they were also pretty eager. And I think do we have matches? I think we had matches today. I'm not
Yeah,
sure
but
I
the
caught
problem
them.
we've
I
been
think
having
we were-
internet.
I was in league scrims.
We've had internet connection problems, so that's been a bummer.
Yeah, not surprised. But yeah, like it's still a pretty natural jump. Like when we get stabilized and can, like it'll just be a pretty similar product to what we were putting out anyways, just without the crowd, which I think is really cool. I think the NBA is probably going to lean on and do what they can. Did you see a funny thing to talk about? Did you see what I think it was the Phoenix Suns did?
No.
Not the 2K team, the actual NBA team. They immediately, with the second the season was announced as postponed, they jumped on it and promoted their own Twitch streaming event where they were going to broadcast. And I think they've been doing this or already have done it. I think they're still doing it. They are still broadcasting all of the remaining. I think there were 20 games left in the NBA season. They broadcast all of them as simulations. So they booted up NBA 2K. They picked their Phoenix Suns, their team, with like their stats based on the developers, right? And they put them against all of their remaining opponents, those 20 games, against like the stat lines. And they just like let the games play out. Like they let the game play itself. Like nobody was controlling any of the 10 players.
I'm going to give you,
they just broadcasted that as their Twitch event. Like that's what they're doing.
I'm going to give you the blueprint of success for an NBA, Madden, whatever you want. Francis Maxwell and Rick Strom, myself, back into 2AT Sports like years ago. We're trying to figure out how to do the YouTube algorithm. And one thing that we figured out was to play matches that were going to be happening like a day or two before and then release it. And like the simulation of the video game. And it would get like hundreds of thousands of hits and people would love it.
Yeah.
And so like, what if you just simply had, the same matchup, exactly as you said, you had the same matchups, but then, so they're doing it exactly right. And every sport should be doing that right now.
The funny thing I heard, like there was like funny little side comments from the people who were involved. And a lot of them were stuff like, yeah, so Phoenix Suns, like you're not an amazing team right now. Like you're not at the top. Are you okay with the numbers like the devs set you at? Because like the devs have to like for every player in the game, even your custom character, you have to have like your personal attributes that like you have to like weigh them up and down like from 99 to 1 or whatever.
Yeah.
And so there was like a lot of comments where they're just like, so are you okay? Like it says your offense is only like an 88. Like how do you feel about that? Like, are you happy with that? Is that good? And so I think there was a lot of like, there's a little like, we have to trust them. Like, they talk to us a lot and all that kind of stuff. But you can read between the lines of like, I think like some players definitely tweeted like, oh, so I'm only a 92. Like obviously feeling a little bit spited, but I think that's just funny as hell.
So I have like a question that is kind of potentially, I always ask you the hard questions that you're very good at dodging the landmines. So dodge the landmines on this one. Why was it the Players Association that pushed to make sure the league kept on going? Like what exactly made sure that we continued the league? Was that the players? Was it the league? Was it both? Obviously a lot of people are incentivized to keep it going.
Yeah, this has been a really hot topic. It was like 3 days ago maybe, where like news came out. And again, I don't know how verified this is, and I don't know the exact numbers. I want to say like the stat people are throwing around is 2/3 of players in the PA. So there's what, 200 players in the PA? No,
I don't know.
100 players in the PA.
Yeah,
I'm
that
trolling.
sounds more like it.
100 players in the PA, assuming all of them are in it, which for the most part they are. I think you're passively just in the PA by being on an LCS or Academy roster.
If it's Academy
Obviously,
2, then it would be 200, right?
Yeah. No. So it'd be 10 teams of 5 is LCS. 10
sorry.
teams. Yeah. So 50-50.
Math.
But obviously there's some plus minus. There's some players that came in and out of the league recently. There's players who are like Solo, for example, who just got signed like 3 weeks ago. So he probably was still like relevant in the PA with respect to kind of conversations, but I don't know if he was like actively in it. So yeah, I think give or take 100 members. But what's really interesting is the stat that everyone's been throwing around. Again, I can't substantiate it anywhere, but the stat that everyone was saying was 2/3 of players, 2/3 of the PA about 90 members. I think they said 90 of the 100 members, around that number. 2/3 of those 90 that responded to this like inquiry, I guess, voted to. And again, they use the phrase cancel. I don't know if outright cancel is what they were looking for, but they voted to quote unquote cancel the spring split. And then and this was not like something they said and then there was like a later conversation. It was like they voted to cancel, and the context of their reasoning was twofold. One, that spring split doesn't matter. And two,
Hot take.
Two, obviously safety concerns. Like there's concerns that in order to get a high enough fidelity product live on Twitch TV/LCS, we need to compromise safety in some capacity, whether that's players going somewhere they don't need to go, receiving deliveries for stuff to set up that, you know, exposes us to the outside world, needing to practice in some way that would be concerning, whether that's like going to a practice, like going to an office or grouping up in a house where you should be quarantined separately, or having referees on site, right? Or asking you to come to the studio and do the matches because we want to be more secure and making sure there's no one cheating. Like all of those things were apparently concerns. But obviously the big thing people jumped on is, of course, oh, so 2/3 of players just think spring split doesn't matter, which is obviously not the case. Like there's no way 60 out of 90 of the players in LCS and Academy like legitimately don't think spring split matters. If that were the case, I think they would all be asking for time off to go be streaming instead. I could see there's like probably an underlying, like, I'm not gonna lie, like Doublelift literally said earlier the split, and he's obviously a central figure to the player group. I think he's one of the like executive committee members for the PA. So he's obviously got a leadership voice in that group. So when he says that earlier in the split, I am not surprised to hear later in the split that like more players have fallen under that opinion. Like it's very easy to fall into that. I wouldn't, it's not necessarily peer pressure, but it is definitely there's got to be some layer of sentiment that gets shared, not like that's originating from each individual player as much as it is like someone in a leadership position says it and shares that sentiment, they feel that way, and then other people can kind of like, you know, cling on to that and say, okay, you know what, I see what they're saying, I kind of agree with that. Now that's not a buy-in, that's not saying, again, 60 people immediately said spring doesn't matter. I can just see the justification where and how a vote like that would take place.
Well, two things. First off, is there any weight in the teams that are on like the bottom 2/3 of the standings would then kind of be incentivized to say that they don't want to play?
Oh, for sure. I could definitely, like, I could understand and see it, but I don't think any of that matters. I think if you try to break it down and say, well, okay, the teams that aren't going to make playoffs. So before this last weekend was when this vote took place, Dignitas, I think, was on like a huge losing streak in 9th, and then CLG was like comfortably in 10th at this point, right? You can argue forwards, backwards, and sideways, like, okay, all 20 of their players guarantee 100% said cancel, but like we don't know that, and they're not going to tell us that, and I don't think it would be fair to expect them to give us that context. So I think that doesn't really end up mattering that much.
But what does matter,
even then, you'd have to look and say there's 40 more players that felt in some way, and there's a point at which you're starting to argue numbers, like, okay, if we're looking at 60 and like 20 of them said it just because of that, if the other 40 players said it was because of safety concerns, that's still significant, right? That's 40 out of 90 said, I'm too scared to play. And if that's the case, like, I still feel like that carries a lot of weight. Apparently the drama here, by the way, just as a quick aside, the drama is not apparently, like, the drama is that the fact that it doesn't matter is even a reason. That I don't think that's the real drama here. I think the drama that actually is getting passed through on this is the way the conversation ended up panning out, because as I understand it, I don't know if the PA was slow to respond or if the LCS was like quick in action. Like, I don't know which direction this actually falls on, but apparently there wasn't like a back and forth. It was like the LCS had already stated, or like I think the LCS like notified the players before the players had finished their vote effectively, right? Like the LCS had like looked at it, thought about it, tried to figure out what they wanted to do. And while the PA had been like deliberating, probably very slowly, I don't know how you collect 90 responses from players right now. They'd come to the decision that we were gonna just be playing remotely and we were gonna figure it out. And I think the drama actually is from the player side, less around it not mattering and even less around the safety thing. Now it's probably turning into were they even asking us really in the first place? Are we actually being heard? I think we've had a lot of conversations around the PA in the last couple of years where people have wanted them to do more. I think teams have wanted them to do more. I think players inside the PA have vocalized they want to see the PA do more. And obviously the fans have always said they want to see more out of the PA. Riot obviously wants more out of the PA the way they invested into it. So I think it feels pretty bad when one of the first areas I think there's been like an open opportunity for a collaborative decision-making process. Something just kind of slipped. I don't know if that's on the league side. I don't know if that's on the PA side. It's unclear to me, and I don't think we're gonna get a like obvious distinction anytime soon. But I think we can probably do more better in the future, just like we always can.
So another like landmine field that I'll give you to play in. Then if a league is not going on, so say we cancel an entire split, does that mean that players get paid because of their contract? Well, yeah, so good luck not hitting landmines. You can just say no comment.
Well, no, this one's easy. So from a legal perspective, it can be complicated. Contracts can be complicated. You can have it set up. I think I would not be shocked if some teams have it set up where you are paid game by game. That is how the rule set is set up. That's how it's stipulated in the rule set. So for the LCS rule set, the minimums that exist, which I think right now are like 52 or it's like 40,000 or something for Academy. I don't remember what the latest number is. It doesn't matter to me. I have a separate minimum because through Golden State, we just have a number we feel more comfortable with, like from like a legal perspective. But with respect to the LCS, it's like 75K or something. I want to say the LCS rule set doesn't say you have to pay them like 75 across a year. It says you must pay them 75,000 prorated based on the amount of games they compete in, right? So if you have players and they play 36 games, they're owed, somewhere in the realm of what is that? Like just over $2,000 a game for LCS, right? So technically, there is wiggle room in those contracts. When games are not being played, it's definitely arguable that you don't need to pay those players because these games are not taking place, and those players I don't think will have a lot of grounds to do anything about it. I don't think that's how the majority of contracts are set up, if I'm being honest. So I think most of them are just salaried players who are paid year round, which is actually how we end up in that weird space that is complicated where players are dropped after the trade deadline of summer split when rosters have locked. And they're suddenly staring down the barrel of not being paid anything for the remainder until rosters open back up. So you can be a player. I think this was like the Echo Fox fiasco, right? Yeah. I think it was like Altec, Adrian, and I forget who, maybe Phoenix. They were dropped either like the day before or like the day after the deadline. I don't remember exactly. And they were salaried employees, but they didn't have like a significant termination fee, like not enough to cover like 6 months, right? It was just like, oh, you get like 2 weeks salary or something. But at that point, rosters are locked. Yeah. So now you can't get paid. You're well, not even paid. You can't even get signed to then wait to get paid until mid-November when rosters unlock. And I want to say that roster lock was somewhere in like June, July. So you're staring down the barrel of June, July, August, September, October, November. You're at 6 months at that point, by the way. It's not just that you can't receive a paycheck from them. It's that you can't work in general in your space. Now, again, you can go be a streamer and you could try to like be a coach, like you could do something else. But if you're trying to be a professional League of Legends player, which I would categorize as playing in the LCS, playing in Academy, or playing in another region's equivalent, so EU Masters, LEC, playing in LCK, etc., LPL. If you're trying to be any of those things, it's complicated. because you just can't, like, for that period of time. That's why they ultimately changed the rule set to like introduce that like wiggle room period. I forget, it's like a safe harbor deadline, where if you get dropped in the last like 24 or 48 hours of the roster lock deadline, like before it, you get an extra 3 days to negotiate and like bounce around. But after that, still you are effectively unemployable for like 5 months. Going all the way back to your original point, this kind of falls into that same scope. If teams don't want to pay players because they're not playing games, arguably, yes, teams can drop players. That can happen at any point throughout the year. There is no window anywhere in the year where you can't drop players, except I will say there are minimums you have to maintain for roster slots. So I couldn't go, like, rosters are locked right now for upcoming for playoffs, and I only have 10 players on my roster, and I have to have 10 players on my roster. It's required. So I can't really drop players if I want to. The league won't allow me to go underneath that, or if I did, they would like fine me for being under our roster allowance. So like in theory, yes, a whole bunch of players could get dropped or could get cut, could get fired because teams don't want to pay them to play. But I don't think that's realistic or functional because teams don't have enough backups, reserve players, and you can't sign new ones right now. So I think the only thing that might happen is if there are contracts where players are paid at a prorated basis by game, those teams could arguably refuse to pay. Now, again, we're not in that scenario. We're playing the games. But if we had outright canceled or postponed indefinitely this split, like that is a scenario you have to kind of like work through both as a team, as a player, and as a league.
So in terms of contracts and orgs and another landmine or minefield that I like to throw you in is when it comes to orgs, at first it was more competitive than anything, and that it's really turned into almost like an agency. And now there's kind of like a hybrid between both, in which that, Golden Guardians, we kind of have a much more heavy on the competitive side, but it is also kind of more of the streamer side as well. But a lot of our streamers also compete as well. So what is the future? Is it a hybrid, or is it strictly competitive? Is it strictly essentially an agency?
I don't know. I think everyone's trying to figure that out. Like I don't think anyone's figured it out. I think people point to TSM and they say that's the model, do it. I think people point right now obviously to 100 Thieves and say that's the model, do it. And I think some people point at Cloud9 and say that's the model, do it. I think they're all wrong. I think they're all right. I think it's a little bit of everything. I think you have to monetize at some point. You have to figure it out, right? We have to get to where we are able to monetize and be in a space that investors are feeling happy to be in the space long term. At some point, we have to get there. I don't think we're there right now, and I don't think anything anyone's doing right now is the tried and true method for success. Like I think it's unfair to think, oh, you have to do what 100 Thieves did. You must be a merchandising company. You must tomorrow pivot your entire esports product into being a Supreme. You must be a Supreme brand, right? You must be Hypebeast. It must happen. I don't think that's a successful business model for sure. I don't think that's a successful esports business model. I think they found a very successful merchandising business model, but I don't know if that's going to be indicative of like championships in the future. I don't know if in like 50 to 100 years, they're going to have like their esports division is going to have the prevalence of all the sports teams you see these days, right? I don't know if that magically does it. Like, do you think if 100 Thieves continues to find like the exact level of success they're finding now in esports, not in their merchandising side, if they find it in esports for 50 years, do you think they are the Patriots? Nah, probably not, right? Maybe they'll be Nike, but I don't think they're going to be like an esports powerhouse. I'm assuming at some point, if you never found like Patriots level like dominant success, that you probably don't rise to that. Now, that's not to say they can't exist for that long. For sure, I'm sure all these groups can. TSM through its influencer space, all of its streamers, and primarily its websites. Like TSM is a website powerhouse. They exist very, very strongly on the website side. Like that's what they've built out, is this like massive influencer website division. I think at this point it aggressively dwarfs their esports initiatives. That's not to say they're not successful in esports. Obviously, TSM's league team is still doing really well. Their Apex team, I think, just won their 5th championship in a row yesterday. So obviously they're relevant in the esports space, but I don't know if 100 straight Apex championships is gonna mean something in like the future. I don't know if that's gonna like scale into being what we're talking about. Like finally they succeeded in building an esports empire. Like that's what's gonna do it. I think winning those those Apex events feels more like pure on the finding success on the esports side than the influencer branded side. I think in 50 to 100 years, I don't know if like Myth and them, for example, I don't even know if you're going to recognize those people as esports people. I'm assuming those are going to like right now. There's a lot of crossover because a lot of these people pop up in a space like it's video gaming culture, right? But I think those are two different paradigms. I think, for example, Shroud, if he had never competed ever, never, like Dr. Disrespect, is Dr. Disrespect successful in the esports space? I would argue probably not. I think he's a huge influencer. I think he's a massive brand. And I think he's like competitive, but he's the equivalent of what I would guess is like a pug star at your local YMCA, right? But with global appeal. Like he can do that, right? Like he can show up to a pickup game and be very competitive. But I don't think like he is, with respect to the sport, is regarded as an NBA player suddenly. Right. I don't think if you went across the country and won in every single YMCA, and it was very popular for that you could then show up to an NBA game and be relevant, right? Or be relevant in their space. I just don't think that's the case. I think a good example of this was, I can't remember his name, for UFC. And I feel bad remembering it because if I remember last time I thought about this guy, I want to say he had just passed away.
Who?
Kimbo Slice. Yeah. So he was a UFC fighter. He got notoriety from street fighting, from just doing like what I would argue, or probably what I would be aware of as probably unauthorized fighting, non-licensed MMA fighting. And he got noticed and picked up to be a fighter for, I can't remember if it was UFC or not, but I think it was. And obviously he's a good fighter, right? Like relevancy wise, he would be like an influencer level fighter in the sport of UFC MMA. But obviously when he actually went and fought, he was just kind of like, he could fight. I want to say he lost his UFC fight. I'm pretty sure. Or if he won one, I'm pretty sure he lost the rest after that. Like, it was pretty obvious that he was an influencer person. Like, he was a brand. He was noticeable, but he wasn't like a competitive person with the capacity to take on a title at some point, right? I think that's the same area that these influencers are, and it's not just TSM. Obviously, people are grabbing up influencers in their own right, kind of all over the place. 100 Thieves has a lot of prevalence with like Courage and Valkyrie and all them.
Well, I think it depends upon the game, because sometimes like with the NBA, you're not going to have like a super really popular person like who's an influencer, have a matchup against, whoever it is, like Steph Curry, whatever. But you do have like people like, let's say, Ninja or whoever, like they're good players, but they're not like the top players. So then you kind of have these invitational tournaments as opposed to like the pure competition. So you now have these kind of like hybrids, and it depends upon the game, because League of Legends has a very, very structured league, but at the same time, you have influencers who still play kind of like these show exhibition matches. So we really do kind of have a blend of both.
Well, I think some of that's also a little bit complicated though, because League's influencers, by and large, were former players.
That's true.
So I will say, I think it makes it clear that if you are a pro player, you can transition to being an influencer.
Yeah.
I think we have found consistently that it is exceedingly rare for you to be able to be an influencer and transitioned into being a pro player. So when we look at TSM, we look at 100 Thieves, we look at these guys that are starting as influencers. When we're looking at Courage and we're looking at Valkyrie and we're looking at these people who play. If you look at Doc, for example, I think they are successful business people. I think they're successful influencers, and I'm sure that is a monetizable space. But I wouldn't argue in any capacity that those assets have made esports monetizable. I don't think they have stabilized esports as a monetizable space to build out, right? And I think that's the challenge people need to be answering to. Maybe it buys you more time. Maybe 100 Thieves gets more runway. Maybe maybe TSM gets more runway because of their influencers bringing attention to the parent brand, bringing attention to the company itself. But I think it's also totally realistic, not likely, but it's totally realistic that say TSM's competitive teams, none of the divisions find monetizable status. Like none of them get propped up in a way that actually ends up working out. I could see in like 50 years where TSM still has just an influencer division and is no longer an esports company. They just pivot and become websites and influencers in the same way. And then suddenly, at that point you are an agency. Like you are literally you are purely servicing as an agency at that point. We're not there yet, but that's where I'd say I don't think anyone's figured it out yet. I don't think anyone's got the model sorted out in a way that it's actually esports. I think people are using these initiatives as methods to prop up their divisions. I think the only way you can make this argument is if you pointed back and said, okay, but Danan, look at the traditional sports team X, who traditionally has never won like a million championships. They're like relatively competitive there around, but look at their merchandising division. Look at their insane production level on their merch. And like that is like a sustainable separate business model. And in order to exist, in order to be that successful, they need the sports team, right? And I don't think we're there, and I don't think they're there. I don't think anyone's in that space where like 100 Thieves tomorrow drops all of their esports team. Does their merchandise division collapse? No. Like if they drop their league team, which is arguably their biggest team, like if they just drop their league team, does their merchandising initiative collapse? No. Like they've still got Courage, they've still got Valk, they've still got Nadeshot. Obviously, like at that point, they're just purely an agency. So I think when maybe we get to the point where like you are monetizing solely off of your merch, like say you get to the point where you are monetizing solely off your merch, like you're literally Nike levels of profit. But if you cut your esports team, all of that goes away. Then at that point, sure, I'll be like, okay, yeah, that is a successful esports business model, but we're not there. Like we have agency models and we have merchandising models, but I don't think we have esports models yet.
It reminds me a lot of multi-channel networks back in the days of Machinima and Maker and
Yes.
Awesomeness. And basically, it was a power grab of we're going to sign as many people as possible. We're going to own their contracts until, like, the contracts were funny because they were like, we own it on Earth and into infinity and beyond, like Toy Story. It was
In case
crazy.
this gets broadcast on the moon.
Yeah. And
It's
so
ours.
we own that. But what I do see that's different from the multi-channel networks was the level of value is added depending upon the org is much higher than others. And I think with multi-channel networks, I remember they would create a platform in which that you would basically log in and they would have like a website or a software that you basically use, and that would be the added benefit. So that way they could scale their benefits to other people. But for the most part, they really only helped the people who were in like the top 1% to 2%. So with esports orgs, it seems like they have to be a little bit more selective in bringing people onto their org because they have to kind of add value. And I think in the beginning, it was just kind of like we're going to put as many people under our banner and just roll ads on their Twitch stream, get impressions. But it seems much more of like adding value. So what orgs do you think are adding the most value to the people that they're bringing on, not just as competitive, but I guess streamers or influencers, just people in general, players?
I mean, I think that one's a little bit harder mostly because you don't know if they're actually viable relationships. I like, for example, you can point and argue and say, okay, Cloud9, right? Like they have like a handful, they have relevant streamers, like Sneaky's now an advisor. Like they have people, but you don't know the details of the deals. For all you know, they're overspending by like a bajillion dollars, and their ratios with Twitch aren't attractive enough, and all of these people they have aren't worth it. At the same time, their deals could be amazing, and the reason they're turning a profit is solely because they are generating value on Twitch enough that they're getting paid enough to not only cover the cost of employing these influencers and streamers and stuff, but also they have overhead at that point. I think without the details, it's really difficult to really fully assess. Like, and it's the same thing for everybody. You don't know what deals 100 Thieves has with their influencers. So as successful as their business looks from the outside, for all we know, they're operating at a significantly higher loss than everyone else in the esports space. And right now they've got this like massive like public sentiment advantage because they have all of these brands, these faces. But in 2 years, whenever those contracts run out, the investors are going to look at it and say, no, I don't want to spend another several $1 million to employ someone who is just turning around and giving us Twitch hours. Like, I don't know. We don't know, honestly, how valuable those are and how, I guess the better phrasing is like, we don't know if those are actually symbiotic relationships or not. We genuinely don't know. And I don't think we're going to find out anytime soon until someone like one of these groups that has a lot of prevalence, like maybe if they go under and their books get opened at some point, if something happens that would expose it, maybe then we'll learn. But until then, I don't think we're going to. I think an example of how damaged the space is right now is some of Astralis. So Astralis, for those of you who don't know, Astralis is a massive team in Counter-Strike. They are recognized right now as the powerhouse in Counter-Strike Global Offensive. They are probably tried and true like the top team in the world. They take massive breaks between events because they are so far ahead and still tend to be very competitive when they come back. Like they've like tripped up a little bit, but like they've had enough like consistency over like 2 years for everyone to be like, okay, they can take months off, they can come back and lose to 1 or 2 teams, and everyone still argues, yeah, they're probably number 1 team in the world. Maybe they're getting caught by Navi right now, but like for all intents and purposes, they're up there. Astralis, I want to say, as part of their company, like splitting, because there was like 3 sports teams that were wrapped under one company that got forced to split by like Valve and ESL and a bunch of different tournament organizers. As part of it, and again, I might be misquoting, but I want to say as part of it, they had to open up and be visible. I think some of the way they operate out of, I think it's like Denmark or Sweden. However they operate, however they incorporate, and however they're splitting, their books had to open. And when it was opened, it immediately was just like, oh yeah, by the way, we are the most successful Counter-Strike team on the planet, and we're just hemorrhaging money. That's just what we're doing. Like, Counter-Strike is not a lucrative, like monetized space where you can make money right now. Like, we are the best team in the world. We have the most leverage in the scene, and we're just spending like crazy just to have these guys playing. Now, again, they're a bad example of a team that could be close to monetizable because Counter-Strike doesn't have large influencers like a lot of other games traditionally. And when it does, they are not pro players. So they're in the bad space of having like pro players who aren't brands, aren't influencers, who can't easily be turned into assets for sponsorships, that kind of stuff, as quickly or as efficiently. But it does indicate like, okay, teams are probably, if the top team is losing that much money, everyone else has to be losing a pretty significant amount as well.
Is Valorant going to overtake that scene?
I would like to see it happen. I love Counter-Strike to death. Like, obviously, like it's gonna be very close to me forever. Like,
I mean, you're the only GM in North American history to win a major.
I knew you were gonna say it. Yeah, so like obviously Counter-Strike is huge to me, but I will always feel like unless something changes drastically, that it is always kind of like Valve's redheaded stepchild.
Yeah.
That is just only going to get the attention it needs to be functionally able to like exist, but it's not going to get like the tender loving care that it probably could get and deserves by like a dev team that wholeheartedly embraces the product in a way that wants to help see it scale and grow into what it could be. Like I think Counter-Strike could be 20 times larger than it is. But I don't think I don't think the people responsible for the IP for the product are currently interested or motivated in doing it themselves. I think they're open to letting it happen. I think they're open to like seeing what other people can do with it, but that's obviously with like a lot of restrictions. And I think some of the restrictions they put in place, like the lack of like actual franchising you can do with your leagues, the limitations on how big and like what you can do with events, the lack of coordination, the lack of integration with like monetizing the game itself in a way that esports can latch onto. I think all of those complications, because there is like almost literally no dev support whatsoever for any of that. I think because of that, it is obviously just heavily limited. And because of that, I would love to see something like Valorant honestly chunk off a significant portion of the space if it can. Again, Counter-Strike is a powerhouse as an IP, just as a product. It's massive and it's very long standing. It's literally 2 decades. Like it's not going to go away. It's never going to die. There's nothing you can do about that. I'm sorry. Like unless you are a bajillionaire and you somehow convince Gabe Newell to sell you Valve, there's nothing you can do about Counter-Strike. It's not going away. But I will say, I think there is an opportunity for another game, in this case Valorant. I could definitely see so far, like when I watch all the videos and all the stuff that the influencers that they pulled in and all the pundits they pulled from Counter-Strike to like check out the game early, everything I see and hear sounds and looks like, okay, it's effectively Counter-Strike with like 5 to 10% of Overwatch level basic abilities, that kind of stuff. I think that's probably the best way to do it. I really do think you take down Counter-Strike. If you want to eat the Counter-Strike space, you have to make Counter-Strike, and then you just have to be more accessible, which is always a limiting factor. I think Counter-Strike is definitely one of the least accessible games to play. It's insanely accessible to watch, but it is astronomically challenging to pick up and play just out of nowhere. It's like Call of Duty is like a 10 on the accessibility meter. Counter-Strike is like a 2, maybe a 3 on a good day. There's like 100 different FPS games. There's like 1,000 different FPS games that you can list that are easier to play, pick up, learn, understand, and like I guess excel in. Counter-Strike is like a 2 because it's really, 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 really difficult to get, especially as like the challenge curve is just insane the further in you get. So I think if you can make something slightly more accessible in a way that it doesn't like scare away all the super hardcore players, and then you make it global, because Counter-Strike's big challenge, which I don't think Valve sees this is a challenge for Counter-Strike, but if you're talking about the scalability of the game, the challenge for Counter-Strike is it's not a global game. It's not in Asia. It's not dominant in Asia. Crossfire is still massive over there. Korea is still dominated by Crossfire, well over Counter-Strike. And China is only just kind of on the cusp of getting Counter-Strike like a little bit more involved than it already was. And I think it's like kind of like stymied the growth because there are other big games there. Valorant has the opportunity to make a truly global game in the same way that League of Legends is. That's why League of Legends is so dominant. League of Legends is the global game right now. Across the board, it is not close. Nothing else is remotely as global as League, except for mobile games, if I'm being really honest, right? So I think Valorant, I would love to see it lean on the global capacity that it can, while still being as much as Counter-Strike as it can, like 90-10. And I think at that point it should have what it needs to be able to take it over.
So one idea that I had was that when it comes to like new games, what ends up happening with marketing is that they reach out to key Twitch streamers, and the second that like it gets released, you've got every Twitch streamer like streaming it, so therefore it's like, oh, that's the game, and you go buy it. But like one idea is, you know, letting games kind of like come and go and die, like Heroes of the Storm. Some would argue with like StarCraft, like, and games have come and gone. But so I guess a really almost painful question is, should we ever let games die? And then what is the through line? Is the through line the publisher? Is the through line the IP series? Is the through line the org? Is the through line the player?
Well, let me ask you a question really quickly on the front of that before I get into it. From like a context of dying, what do you mean? Do you mean dying is like we should stop supporting, like, okay, here's a game that died that I love to death, and it dying tears me apart. This game that nobody cares about, that no one's played, called Enemy Territory Quake Wars.
Quake.
Now this was a mashup of two weirdly relevant areas that crossed over in a magical way that should have been amazing, but the dev didn't end up supporting it, and so it just died. So first there's Enemy Territory. So I want to say the original Enemy Territory was like Enemy Territory Wolfenstein, which is basically like a big like 15 on 15 or 20 on 20, like it was like Battlefield before Battlefield, or like kind of at the same time as Battlefield, like objective based map, first person shooter thing, right? With like vehicles and all that kind of stuff. So think Battlefield in that same context. That's what Enemy Territory was, but like in this like Nazi-ish world, right? Like World War II-ish era of stuff going on. And then separately, everybody knows what Quake is, right? Quake is like the aliens and all the craziness, and then like the supers, the jumpy shooter stuff, right? Those are the two like universes that somehow came together, which I will still never understand, between id Software and Splash Damage. These two companies came together and they made Enemy Territory Quake Wars, or ETQW. And so they took these universes and they made like Battlefield-ish, or Enemy Territory. They took the Enemy Territory IP and they just injected the Quake universe into it. And they're like, okay, it's the same gameplay, the same like concept of strategy across like a big map with multiple objectives. You're like, for one section, you're capturing a flag. And then once you capture the flag, you need to go plant a bomb to blow up this reactor. And then once you plant the bomb and blow up the reactor, you blow up the door, I guess. And then once you blow up the door, you need to escort this like tank machine thing to the end cycle. And if you do all three of those in like 25 minutes, your team wins, right? They took that and they shoved the Quake universe into it. So now it's like the humans versus the aliens of the Quake universe. So you have like either side, and like you have like the class abilities. So if have you played PlanetSide ever?
No.
PlanetSide ended up doing this again. So there's been a whole bunch of different iterations of this, but Enemy Territory Quake Wars was like my favorite one, with this like class-based, tactical, large scale, right? Very Battlefield-esque, but with like, it's like Battlefield in the Quake universe, which sounds super sick because it was. Unfortunately, that game died because that game existed solely on their servers. Like, it was not a game you could play locally. It didn't have a campaign. Unlike like Call of Duty and stuff, like it just didn't have a campaign. So once there isn't support from the dev, unless someone else is able to prop up servers, like local host them or something, the game's just gone. That's what happened to that game. That game had a large player base that was pretty successful, but the two companies that were working together like couldn't figure out how to keep working together. And so the game died. So that was an online only game that you just can't play anymore. Like, it's just not possible to play that game. When you say died, or when you say should a game die, do you say like that? Or are you saying like Heroes, not even Heroes of New Earth. Heroes of New Earth is another good game. Heroes of New Earth was probably the best MOBA. It was probably better than League of Legends. It was probably better than Dota 2. It was definitely better than Heroes of the Storm. It was definitely better than Smite. Heroes of the New Earth was actually, from a purist standpoint, insanely exactly what the MOBA universe needed and wanted. They just screwed up with their monetizing model being like pay up front. You had to pay like $40, and how they were going to like monetize long term. No, Andrew, Dawngate was not the best MOBA. But yeah, like Heroes of New Earth was that. But the company, made wrong decisions on how to monetize, and it went under. Again, game you just can't play anymore. It's just not possible. So when you say die, do you mean that, or do you mean like Heroes of the Storm?
That was
Do
the
you
most.
mean like the game exists, but and it's monetized? Like the company can justify keeping the servers online, but nobody cares about it in a competitive sense? Like where does the line of like dying happen? Because like there's a big scale of enemy territory Quake Wars all the way to here's the storm, and like here's the new Earth is probably somewhere in the middle.
First off, that was one of the most interesting history flexes of video game industry that I've ever heard. I know id Software, and I love and any excuse to talk about ID Software is
Just
great.
don't talk to me about splash damage.
Never heard of
I
Splash.
will fume.
Never heard of
I will
Splash.
fume aggressively.
So,
What is
anyways,
splash
letting
damage
go
these
of that, there is the more like immediate of here's the storm, in which they stopped support when it came to the here's the dorm, that kind of stuff. But then there's other things like StarCraft, which that was like this giant boom, but it just kind of fizzled out. So I think it's a combination of when developers just stopped supporting it, or third-party tournament organizers, white labels stopped supporting it, and just the viewership just kind of dies down. And so obviously there will always kind of be like little resurgence here and there, but for the most part, what is going to be the ultimate through line? Is it players? Is it orgs? Or is it game developers or specific game series?
Can you reiterate that question in a more accessible way?
What's more powerful? What's more valuable in esports? Is it the superstar? Is it the super org? Or is it the super game?
Oh, the game is the only thing that matters.
Okay.
Yeah, like we could delete every esports team that exists right now. Start fresh tomorrow, and esports would be just fine. Like functionally, it would take like 2 years to get back up and running. But like if everybody just disappeared, it'd be totally fine. Like none of this needs no game needs esports right now. Like League would lose some relevance. Like it would lose some prevalence. But overall, like League of Legends would be totally fine, right? Players, same thing. Like players get changed literally every day. Like no game exists. Like Faker is the biggest esports entity in the history of anything. Ninja, like it kind of wasn't. He was an esports entity when he was competitive. Like when he was playing Halo and stuff. Like yeah, he was there, but he wasn't like propping those scenes up, and he wasn't that big yet. Now he's like obviously massive, but he doesn't like have Fortnite in his hands. Like he can't, like if he just like, I mean, he doesn't play Fortnite a lot anymore, but if he just outright refused to ever play Fortnite again, it wouldn't have like a lasting real impact on Fortnite as a product. The only thing that ultimately matters for like the growth and longevity of an esport is the dev. Now that's not to say the dev has to do it. I'm not saying the dev itself has to sit there and like gingerly like carry this through on building out what it is, but the dev has to be open and willing to do what is necessary to grow and like organically build an esports product. That is the big thing. Like if you want to be an esport as a developer, you have to be accessible and willing to be part of it. Again, you actually don't have to invest like a bajillion resources. I think there's like tons of groups. I think there's tons of teams who are totally willing to spend their own. I guarantee you, if Riot came to the LCS organizations tomorrow and said, "Hey, LCS is gone. Like like Riot Esports as a concept is gone. But we're gonna give you a pipeline to do what you need to do. Like you can hire your own engineers and your own software engineers. You can hire your own development team to build esport adjacent products alongside in unison with in parallel to our main dev team. Teams would foot the bill immediately. Like if they came to me and said, "Hey, we're replay system. We don't need it. Nobody spectates games anymore. So that's not like a product that the live team cares about, right? But you guys complain about it a lot and you want a new one. We're not going to make a new one. And actually the current one's super deprecated. We actually don't care about it anymore. We're going to take it offline." If they told me right now that they're killing it, but if I spent enough money and hired my own engineers and worked as much as I could with whatever neutral party they give me in the middle, like a developer, a guy at Riot that would coordinate, and said, you can code your own spectator client, I guarantee you I could turn around and get all 10 LCS teams and probably teams not even in the LCS to invest in this product immediately, because they understand the value, and are interested in being in the space enough that they're totally bought in. They're totally bought in on investing in League of Legends esports. And I think that's the thing that matters the most is you have to have devs who are willing to have those types of conversations when they're ready. Right now, I'm guessing that's not the case. Like, I don't think Riot's just like given up on Spectator. I don't think this is like a thing they're just retiring or anything anytime soon. So like that kind of type of conversation would never happen. But a group that would be interesting would be Counter-Strike with Valve. Like, it would be really interesting if you could have a conversation with them where they're like, hey, we have like 5 devs on this game. They make, they make 15 new gun, knife, and glove skins every 3 months, and they just put them in a kit, and that's what they do, right? And I would say, okay, yeah, that's what they do. And they say, but we want to see esports succeed, but we don't want to do it. Like, that's not our space. We don't want to hire a Nate Nanzer. We don't want to hire a Waylon or a Chris Greeley. We don't want to hire someone to like do an esports thing like Overwatch League. Can you hire like, if you want to, like, can we just give you Counter-Strike esports, and like we're not gonna invest any of our time into it, but we'll give you access to our like code base. We'll give you like a branch that you can inject stuff into and play with. We'll show you enough of how the game works that you can like basically create your own subsisting universe of products for esports. Would you do that? Yeah, I would be like, yeah. Oh, immediately I'd do that for sure. Like, I would do that in a heartbeat. If they then also said, we're also not restricting any competitive stuff. You can franchise, you can build tons of in-game items. Like, you can build 100 different sprays, and you can integrate broadcasts into the game itself. All those different things that don't actually impact the game itself. Like, you're not taking away the fact that they sell skins, and if you don't take away like their base monetizing model, and you don't take away like purely what Counter-Strike is at its core inside the game, but they give you access. If a dev just did that and said that, yeah, I'd be super down. I think that is the kind of thing that needs to happen for sport to grow. But right now we have like the two extremes. We have like the dev that just like completely has no interest in getting involved whatsoever, and doesn't even want to invest the resources in maintaining a conversation, much less actual projects or initiatives. Or we have the other end where the actual esport itself is owned, operated, and subsists solely on the initiatives that the developer chooses to partake in, which in my opinion are not, it's never going to be enough until you have someone who's purely in it for esports. I don't think it's going to be there. And I think that's where like Overwatch League and LCS and where those guys are at right now, Call of Duty, the Pro League, CDL. I think all 3 of those are in that vein of they're owned, operated, and exist on the back of the developer, and the developer has their idea of how they want to do it. But it seems very low scalability right now. I think a lot of them have the idea like, let's start slow and then we'll ramp up at some point. But I think most esports teams are saying, why wait? What's the point? Like, we're all ready, we're all willing, we're down to invest and help. We don't think it's that expensive. Like, you view it as like a large expenditure for something you don't have a lot of hope in. And if that's the case, let us be the ones spending that money. And let us like drive that initiative and try to grow. Because like we talked about this last week, what I want to see happen is I want to see one of these esports become, I would like to see most of them, tons of them, but I want to see at least one of them become the NFL or the NBA in size and scope. Like, soon. I want to see it in 20 years. I think that's totally reasonable. Because I want to get rich off esports. Again, that's the tagline. I just want to get rich off esports. That's all I'm here for. But I think that happens. I think that happens through one of these leagues growing and literally being the NFL or the NBA in size and scope. And I don't think anyone's taking aggressive enough stances on doing it. And again, I don't think it's their job. I really don't think it's Valve's job to give. Say I'm a CSGO team. I don't think it's their job to give me and the other teams or the TOs enough money to turn it into the NFL and NBA. I do think it is kind of their job, if they want to do right by the IP, by the property that they own. I think it is their job to like be more accessible, be more open, and be more willing to have a conversation about how we can get our resources involved in scaling and growing and doing more, because I feel like these devs are usually pretty shy on those types of things, and they're not aware of how bold we are.
So a couple things. First off, in referencing last week, you talked about last week that Overwatch and Blizzard are doing that thing in which that they have the potential to scale at the level in which that you're talking about, like the NFL, NBA. So that's en route. You say there's kind of like two categories. I would argue that there's kind of three. The first one is the developer who simply has zero desire to do anything, and then essentially you have a third-party tournament organizer like ESL then come up and then run their own tournaments in which that you then have organizers. Go ahead.
Well, I was just actually going to say, I should rephrase. Valve actually isn't even the most absent. Nintendo.
Oh yeah, no.
Is the most. They
Absolutely.
are the most absent father of a massive esports space that can possibly exist with Smash in general. Obviously, Melee is like the main product that they just like never leaned on or even pretended to care about. I think it's funny, you can sum the entire like support of what Nintendo has ever done for the Smash Melee scene into one thing they ever did. Like literally one thing. I think, and I might be wrong, I think they tweeted once. I think like, and it wasn't even like main Nintendo. I think it was like a Nintendo of America. So it was only like the Western world or something. Tweeted like, good job, Hungrybox or someone for winning Evo. And
Wow.
again, I'm probably misremembering, but like that's the only thing Nintendo has literally ever done. If anything, they had been prohibitive of Smash Melee finding success. So there actually used to, oh yeah, you'd love this. There used to be a ban on Melee events. I'm not sure if you're aware of this. You actually couldn't run Melee events. They sent C&Ds.
Wow.
I'm not kidding. They actually sent C&Ds. They sent notice to organizers back in the day. So I can't remember how long it was. I'm probably exaggerating. I'm going to say it was like 10 years, but it was probably like 5 years or something, or like 3 years. But there was like a significant period in time where grassroots Melee events were existing. And Nintendo was just like, kill it now, go away. We have our new, I don't know, Brawl coming out or whatever game was. So they actually, like, Nintendo did the opposite, like the worst thing you could do. They invested resources in stopping esports. Like they went out of their way to kill the grassroots scene because they just aggressively didn't want it to exist, because they felt like it was cannibalizing their the success of, I think it was Brawl.
To play devil's advocate.
They eventually repealed that. To be clear,
Yeah.
they eventually repealed that and said never mind, and they stopped sending C&Ds, but they still never came around and supported. They never did anything. I want to say they eventually, years and years and years later, tweeted at like one dude winning an event or something. Or they tweeted and said like, hey, watch this like one event or something. But there's never been any real support anywhere else. And then like this, like last time, everyone thought, oh, Ultimate is fine. They were going to do it. And they kind of did like a big deal at E3 with like competitive and we're doing a thing. And it just fell super flat. And they tried to like support Smash Ultimate alongside whatever that weird punching game was that I forget, where they're like, Nintendo takes esports seriously. And they had like 3 competitive, quote unquote, competitive events with like influencers and players playing Ultimate and playing that weird punching
Splatoon?
game. No. Oh, Splatoon is like another game where they like have feigned interest in being competitive, where they were like, oh yeah, there's like a professional competitive Splatoon event at E3 or something, that I guess technically, because they tweeted it, you could argue like Nintendo supported it, at least supported it more than Melee. But Nintendo is definitely the example of the developer who is like so disconnected. And again, that's not like a bad thing. It's not their, it's totally not like on them. Like Nintendo doesn't have to support the space. They just have to not be prohibitive of the growth of the space. And that's the thing they did do.
I'll speak on behalf of Nintendo as a representative and say that the creator of Smash simply said it is a game for families to just play recreationally. So like they had no interest in making the idea of the game into a competitive thing because it's inherently supposed to be a fun, relaxing game. 1, 2, Melee, they couldn't make money off a game which they were no longer publishing. So therefore, the push for Brawl seemed to be like very, obvious. But then Ultimate seems to be finally the perfect marriage, not necessarily the perfect marriage, but like the best bridge between the Melee and, Nintendo actually making money off of it. So
No, I think that'd be fair. I think if you're going to argue like, hey, we want to kill Melee because we're trying to support Ultimate, cool. Then actually support Ultimate. Go, you host the majors, you host the events, you put up the prize pools, you build on this very insane organic grassroots community and make it a real esport. If you're not going to, then if you're not going to touch Ultimate, then don't touch Melee. For all intents and purposes, they have nothing to do with each other with respect to people who actually play and care. The people who are playing Melee are not the people who are like, yeah, I really care about Ultimate too. Anyone playing Melee is like, it's because like that's like my game for the rest of my life. I was like 12 when it came out. I played it for like 1,000 hours at the age of 13. So I'm just going to play it for the rest of my life, right? That's totally normal and reasonable to expect for a game like that. Like I think whenever these Smash games come out, they collect that like that range of players and that age range when they're in that like 11 to 17 range. And that's the game those players like. Hilariously enough, Melee is massive, right? But with my LCS player age group, like I'm a Melee person, but I'm a little bit older than everyone else. Everyone else is somewhere in the realm of like 19 to like 24. Guess what they all play? They all play Ultimate.
yeah.
And that has nothing to do like it has nothing to do with because they don't like Melee. It's just they weren't born in the Melee age range, so it's not there. So I don't really see like a massive crossover in these two spaces in a way that you would like need to push Melee down. And again, I don't think it's Nintendo's job to make Melee a thing from a competitive like large scope thing. But I think the least they could do is be like vaguely supportive and try to be open to the unique and interesting things people want to do with Melee. And I think they've been better about it. Like they're not sending C&D, they're not closing down tournaments, so that's like a step up. But like obviously my point is just don't be Melee.
So
or don't be Nintendo.
The in slowly wrapping up this
Wrapping back to Valve.
That I see the 3 categories, and it is the developer then who just doesn't care. Then they basically have a third-party organizer, and then you have either individuals or teams coming in, like orgs coming in, and then players. Or the other one is you've got a strong developer, but then they create a league, a league with orgs in which that they're closely knit, like Riot does or Blizzard Overwatch. And then you have players who like almost have the least say in things. And then you have the other one in which that it's Fortnite, Epic, where it's Fortnite and then direct to the players. And therefore they're bypassing orgs. Like I know that they just like actively tried to like push orgs to the side. And that way it gave all the power to the developer and the players. Obviously the developer always has most of the power, but it gave more power to the players instead of the orgs. Do you think that it behooves developers to work with either third-party organizers or create leagues, or simply bypass all of that and create their own infrastructure and go straight to the players?
I think you can honestly take any pathway. It doesn't really matter. As long as you built a successful game, you can work with teams and building a whole cool, big, awesome thing. Totally reasonable to do. That's literally Overwatch League. That's what they did.
Yeah.
They took a space. They ignored the players conceptually. They did a year of like grassroots stuff just to like buy time. And then they just selected big partners. I think like product-wise, the Overwatch League is fantastic. If you watch the broadcast and you talk to the technical people on what they're doing, and you look at what they're doing from a business perspective, from a very, very analytical point of view, fantastic. Those people, like, I'm not kidding, they wrote a Bible on how to create an esports event that is just like totally true and real and does exactly what you want it to do. If you want to run a competitive LAN event, fantastic, awesome resource. I will say though that I think their initiatives fall more flat because the product itself that they made as a game might not be suited for the long-term growth of being an NBA or NFL size thing. Now, again, some of that has to do with, I think, some of the initiatives in the perspective they have on growth, I don't know if they're even close to what they want to be relevance wise. And I don't know if they're trying to be. I don't think they're trying to like Overwatch is going to be this global phenomenon that is everywhere all the time now. I think the esports space was important to get up and prop up immediately because they had told a bunch of people like this was just like how they got how they propped up themselves in the first place. But I think what they want to be, if they're doing it right, and I think by the way, I think Riot's figured this out, which is why you're seeing some interesting new stuff happen. I think Overwatch League has something very interesting that they can and are probably doing, and they're testing, but it's not out yet. And that is being culturally relevant. Like, look at it this way. Like, everybody plays traditional sports. Nobody plays traditional sports competitively.
Yeah.
Like population-wise, right? The amount of people who, like, played football growing up is, like, this insanely massive statistic. Like, it dwarfs the, like, tiny amount of people who end up going on a field in an NFL game, right? Same thing with like tennis. A bajillion people all over the world play tennis. There's like, I don't know, 600 competitive like pro players, like if that, right? But what I think what Overwatch has recognized is it doesn't matter how many pro players you have. That's not what's relevant. It matters how many people exist around being aware of your product as like a cultural entity in their life, right? How many people just in their free time go, like this is like where mainstreaming comes up as a concept, right? Like how many people come home and play Overwatch? How many people come home after school and play soccer or play football, play baseball? That's what baseball is, right? Like if you talk to anyone younger these days, baseball is insanely dreary. It lasts forever. The tempo of the game is insanely, it just doesn't match up with the lives we live now. We live with our phones in our hands and short attention spans, and we're just immediately doing things right away all the time. It's instant gratification. Baseball is the literal opposite of everything conceptually that you could do with. The game has insane amounts of stoppage, has an aggressive amount of strategy that is not visible, like straight up invisible strategy, just not even possible to, even if you like watch the game for like 2 straight years, just stare at baseball. There's like a whole underlying game of strategy with respect to the pitcher and like the shifting and inside the dugouts and like how they manage rosters. Like baseball is like a whole universe of strategy that you never even get to like pretend to get engaged with. And like football is the same thing, right? But that's not what people are attached to or care about. So from like how do you build a successful sport product, that part's not as relevant. And I think Overwatch gets that. I think when people say, oh, Overwatch is too complicated to watch, it's just too difficult to understand, I laugh and say like, what are you talking about? Go watch it. Imagine like these people, when they watch an NFL game, to them, it's as simple as the quarterback versus the other team, right? If you can dumb it down to that, you can dumb down Overwatch into like literally being whatever the hell you want it to be. So I don't think that's a viable argument. I think the thing Overwatch is doing or is going to do that I don't know if other groups have figured it out, except maybe Riot, is make it a cultural entity.
Yeah.
Make it just less about the competitive esporty highest level. Like the highest level will get supported organically when your entity is just a thing someone does. So I would say, what do you think a safe estimate would be? 90% of people who grow up in America like play baseball casually at some point. Not a lot. No, not a lot. I'm saying like, did you ever
Males.
pick up a bat with a ball and swing?
90% of males, I'd say, in the U.S., yeah.
Well, I would say females too, like they run into it. I'm not saying they played all the time. I'm not saying they did it every week when they were growing up. I'm not even saying they did it once a year. I'm saying at some point you engaged in baseball or softball. Maybe basketball is a better example because that's like more accessible across like the entire grouping of the U.S. But like for all intents and purposes, you are engaged in a traditional sport at a young age where you don't necessarily like get engaged with it and like that's like the thing you do, but you're aware of it, right? But like what age do you think people get engaged with like League of Legends?
Like
Do you think 6-year-olds or 8-year-olds are getting into League of Legends?
11-year-olds? But no, not 6-year-olds.
Maybe, but like a significant amount of 11-year-olds. Do you think the most consistently young age that League of Legends engages with players is 11? I would say not. I would say if you took most players who play, not pro players, like most, if you just like averaged it out and you asked every player across the whole world what age they played League at, like they got introduced to it, it's probably like 14. It's probably like 12 to 14 at best, right? And I think that's a struggle. I think 12 to 14 might be a bit too late, but I think Overwatch is going to do a good job. I think they figured out, let's just be a cultural property. Let's take these characters, this universe, this contextual information that is separate from Overwatch League, the competitive product, and let's make it accessible everywhere all the time. Imagine if your kids grew up in a world, and I say a world, not in America, in a world where their Saturday morning cartoons, whatever the equivalency is now of that, there's just an Overwatch cartoon.
Yeah.
It's literally Teen Titans, but Overwatch characters, and they're at, a relatable age. Hell, what if there's a Rugrats for Overwatch characters? What if there's Baby Widowmaker and Baby Winston? Like, that's possible, right? You can actually make that with that property. And like, say 6 to 8-year-olds are waking up, they're watching Overwatch Teen Titans, whatever that is. And then they turn around, and I'm not even kidding, because this one literally already happened. They eat their Overwatch branded cereal, Lucio's. Those exist, by the way. They already did that one. And then on the way to school, actually by then you won't be going to school. Everything will be remote, like it is turning into today, for different reasons. But during their break time at school, you know what they're doing? They're reading an Overwatch comic book. Same universe, different stories, same characters, all relatable and accessible. So their food, Overwatch. Their morning routine, Overwatch. They're wearing Overwatch clothing. Overwatch clothing is actually something that's very common. Diva outfits are all over the place. Cosplay is massive when it comes to Overwatch. I'm going to mention it, and I'm going to go past it very quickly. Very quickly. I'm going to just breeze past the fact that the #1 Rule 34 property for gaming was like Overwatch for like a massive amount of time. Like, the game itself found like relative mediocrity and success, but like that space is still insanely powerful. And then like carrying on through, like, imagine if this stuff is just constant everywhere. You know how in like your textbooks at school, they like sometimes lean on other characters from like different generations and like that kind of stuff? Same thing, right? Overwatch just becomes culturally relevant across the board. What if they start building teenager shows? What if they start making adult shows? They expand the universe of Overwatch and make it more accessible everywhere. They put out movies, right? What if you can go to a theater and see an Overwatch movie? What if you can pull up Netflix right now, Disney Plus, and there is an Overwatch movie? What if you turned on Disney XD and the Overwatch Championship was on? By the way, that thing I just mentioned already happened. They're hitting all of those benchmarks for hitting that younger age range. So if you grow up in from 6 years old to like 15 years old, where the majority of the like stuff around you is Overwatch, how much more Overwatch do you think you're going to play older? Maybe not a ton. Maybe Overwatch isn't your main game, but are you going to be aware of it? Yeah, you're going to know what Overwatch is.
You're essentially bridging Disney and their just reach, and Disney Marvel and that whole universe with sports. Yeah. And now you have both of them combined. No.
Well, the thing is, the sports part isn't even relevant yet. None of what I said from 6 to 15 had anything to do with Overwatch League. You didn't care about Overwatch like as a competitive product. You only cared about Overwatch the universe as an edible product, like something you can get into and be aware of, right? Now, when you hit 15, 16, 17, when you hit your early 20s and you didn't pick up baseball, you didn't pick up football, you didn't pick up basketball, you didn't pick up NBA 2K, you didn't pick up any of the other esport games, you're not going, you just never did. When you're looking at something that you're going to find accessible, that you understand, you're going to understand Overwatch. When you watch Overwatch League for the first time at age 14, because you watched the TV show as a kid, ate the cereal as a kid, grew up and read the comic books as a kid, went to a couple of the movies as a kid, when all of that like entertainment came at you through culture, when you watch Overwatch League, yeah, like maybe the camera's shitty because it's like a hard game to like watch. But contextually, you're going to understand what's going on. You're going to recognize the characters in the universe. You're going to know what they're fighting for. You might know the voice actor's name for that character. All of this stuff, you're going to understand and you're going to relate to it. And then at that point, you're a viewer. Bam, done. And that was before you even tried to play the casual version of the game. That's the kind of stuff I think that if you want to build like a lifelong growing esport, I don't think you have to do that. I think that is a very powerful medium, a very powerful tool to get it into the schools of the world in a way that's accessible. I do think that is one of the biggest limiting factors for Counter-Strike. I think when I hear competitive Counter-Strike, like competitive high school events for Counter-Strike, I don't think that's functional. Maybe in the rest of the world, I don't think that's a functional in America. I don't think you can ever put Call of Duty or Counter-Strike in schools. I don't think it'll be functional. Like the political climate will probably never be ready for it in America. Yeah, you can do Overwatch easily. Those characters fit right in. Conceptually, half of them are probably in high school anyways for what they do. And I think that's something that maybe Riot's figuring out. I think like you've seen like the Riot comic books they started putting out, right? You've noticed all these shorts. Riot confirmed that they're having their own, I don't know if it's an anime or it's just an animated series, like all this stuff pop up, right? I would not be shocked if Blizzard has been doing all of that and it's already done. I think Lucio's is a great example of them being like already way ahead of the game, knowing they can do that. And I think Lucio's was like it's just a test product, right? Let's put it out and see if we can produce, manufacture, and build up something that's quality of that type. And then, you know, in 5 years, there's 6 other serials just like it that are another Overwatch universe spinoff of it.
In just like the film world, yeah. Marvel did that with the Avengers movies, but they had multiple different storylines going through, but then they expanded into the Netflix series as well, in which they were kind of like substandards or whatever. And so you had that kind of thing. But what you're talking about is so broad, so deep and wide and just like all encompassing. And the way that I see it is that it's like pop music and then like indie artists, and the way that games and IP and those worlds that you kind of create, like Riot is creating their own world in which that spans different games and all these other places. Same thing with Blizzard. They are creating these entire worlds and all that stuff. But then you do have then like almost like the outcasts of like the Melee kids or whatever. And with CS, like it's never going to take hold at the level in which that you're talking about of pop culture. But at the same time, those communities will still always almost be there. And I think that's the fun part about video games is that they will essentially be the identity of people, because culturally, like when you're, you know, by the water cooler talking about, you know, sports, it's like, hey, you know, did you see the game with NBA? It's either like, what games do you follow? Is it NBA? Is it NHL? Like whatever. But now it's like, what games do you follow for video games? But then as you're saying, one, it's going to start so early, just like sports, but then it's not even like touching sports. It's talking about like pop culture of just even the music, like the artwork, the everything. And so the way that you talk about that, I remember seeing a graph of saying the monetization per fan, and like NHL was like one of the highest ones. I think it was like $50 something or maybe more. And they looked at esports fans, and it was like $2 or $3 or something like that. It was nothing. But when you think about it more from the IP and the developer as like a whole, like branching out all over, then you almost like Disney, I think, would be one example in which that you could look at that and say, oh, I don't know, like $100 or something like that. But then when you're talking on the level that you're talking about, that's like $1,000 or something like that per person. It's exponentially higher. And it's not only just that, but it's lifelong. It's an identity. It's like how you identify who you are. It's crazy.
No, exactly. I think if you can get a game and make it, I think if you can get a universe and make it culturally relevant,
Yeah.
all you have to do is make a mediocre game for the game itself to be successful. I think if you want to build a good esport, it would be fantastic. You'd be very ahead of the game if you could build a foundational cultural relevance for the universe, the product itself, and then pair that with an actually legitimately good game. And then you bring those two together, and that's where you build your like trifecta of an esports product that can be large, sustained, successful, monetizable, and stable. And I think like League is kind of doing it backwards, where it's like we'll start with a really, really, really fucking good game, and now we'll work back towards building like cultural relevance and something that like people are engaged with at a young age and for a long time. And then we're doing that in parallel with trying to build a good League product. I do think Overwatch is trying to do the let's build like a really good esports product first, and then build like a cultural relevance thing. And they're like the last thing they're trying to do is build a good game, right? I think that's the problem. Like it's kind of like, what should you build first, the chicken or the egg?
Yeah.
And in this case, it's got 3 steps, and you have to pick one. I think if you can find a way to do them all in unison, it would be great. Maybe Valorant can do that. Maybe they can build a universe people are engaged with at the same time that they build an amazing game that's like fun and playable to the specifications, like the standards of Counter-Strike, and at the same time build a true, real, stable, competitive form. I think maybe Valorant's one of the first opportunities to do all 3, because League couldn't have. There's no way they could have known they were going to find that level of success. Overwatch, I think, already made their missteps, and they're having to like make up for it. And I don't think Counter-Strike's in the same boat as League. Is like there's no way they could have known or figured that out. There's nothing in advance they could have done. So I think Valorant might be one of the first games where there's that window. I think there's other games that see this, by the way. I think there's games that are aware of this, but that I think the hardest thing to tackle, actually, I don't know if it's the hardest thing, but to me, like the thing that's least accessible. Like I know what a good game is and how to make a good game. I understand. Like if you task me with that for like 10 years, I could probably figure out how to make an insanely good game, right? And esports, I obviously understand. That's what I do. I understand how to build a successful esports something, whatever you even want to call them now. I wouldn't even call them just like companies. But I don't know how to make like a world-renowned cultural product that is successful at the level that traditional sports are in the world. I just don't.
Who's gonna win, Blizzard or Riot? Oh, both owned by Tencent, so Tencent wins.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is I was going to say Tencent's going to win no matter what happens, probably. I think Riot has the best chance of winning at this point.
Yeah.
I don't think Blizzard, unless like they haven't announced anything recently, but I don't see any product they have oncoming that can that can like topple League first and foremost, or that is able to carve space out in the way that I think Valorant can, right? Like I think Overwatch is now it's kind of its own thing that isn't really competing with anything else, but I don't know if it has like the legs to be massive. I think the Warcraft universe itself is always going to be successful as like a sales product, but I don't think it has anything to do with esports realistically. And then I don't know when there's anything to be done with the rest of their properties with respect to esports. Like Diablo is never relevant. Hearthstone, like just the way they make that game isn't conducive to being like a big esport thing. It's like fun to watch, but not really a thing you could get into with like a large, overwhelming viewership base. So I think Riot is the only team that actually even has the opportunity at this point. The question is, can they?
I'll kind of relatively end on this, which is Blizzard has been essentially the central the egg essentially, where they created the map editor in which that allowed for Dota, which turned into Dota All Stars, Heroes and now League Legends, and also when you look at like the League, and it seemed like Riot keeps on kind of like borrowing from Blizzard. Do you think that Riot is Do you think Riot is
Well-
going to get ahead of what Blizzard's doing? And in fact, as you said, that it seemed like Blizzard kind of built the competition, but they didn't have the great game. But it seemed like Riot had the great game, and now they're learning from Blizzard and making the great competition in that ecosystem. So are they going to get ahead of Blizzard?
I think right now, like, League is winning in the better game category and the better esport category.
Yeah.
Just to be clear, I think the thing League doesn't do as well as Blizzard is be mainstream. Like,
Yeah.
be public and accessible and visible. The only product they have for that is League of Legends, and it's not like, I don't think there's any like 6 to 12-year-olds that care about League of Legends whatsoever and ever will. Like, I don't know if there's like a good accessible way to get in unless they turned around and made a kids TV show and made a ton of action figures that are playable. Like, obviously they have the figurines and they have the collectibles for like the people in their like late teens, 20s into their 30s, but I don't think League has anything that's like child accessible. And with that being the case, I think that's their struggle is like, I don't know how they build like this cultural, I don't know how they build the culture behemoth they need to in the way that Blizzard does that kind of natively with their products, just inherently, like that's what they are. They're like more, they're more pure fantastical. Warcraft was like something that got like attached on by everybody. Overwatch is way younger accessible. They do a bunch of mobile games like Hearthstone, where like that's something that you can just like pick up and people at a younger age can play with, or especially casuals, people who aren't hardcore gamers, people who don't play a lot of games, find Blizzard games way more accessible. Diablo is an insanely accessible game. The Warcraft games were very accessible. World of Warcraft has become like the most accessible version of itself that could possibly exist over time. Obviously, Overwatch and Hearthstone and Heroes of the Storm are all just insanely accessible types of games. The only product that really exists outside, like League has like Runeterra, which is a less accessible card game, and Teamfight Tactics, which is inherently like an auto chess, is not a super accessible thing. I think it's more accessible than League of Legends, but overall, like conceptually, it's just more challenging than picking up Hearthstone, right? So I don't know if League is like magically going to get there, and I don't know if they want to. I don't know if you want to be always the most accessible developer. I think maybe it gives you a leg up when you're there, but maybe it doesn't. Maybe it locks you into keeping things too simple, and then you can't scale. I do want to note that you mentioned Warcraft and Warcraft 3. I think Blizzard made a right and a wrong. Like, they're in a really weird spot. With Warcraft 3, they screwed it up aggressively. The remaster, for all intents and purposes, that I would say is a failure. They made you, like, if you owned the game originally, you still had to like rebuy it anyways, which like I get to get the new textures, but you kind of can't play old Warcraft 3 anymore. Like, if you try to play it, like the online servers don't work anymore. It's like weird. Like, they basically broke the game everybody was playing and said you have to buy the new one, which would be fine if you could buy the new one and still play the old one, or buy the new one and it had all the features and functionality of the original one. But it has neither. It doesn't have all the features and stuff, and it really isn't like quality-wise that's good. I think the style of what they did, like the texture upgrade and stuff, isn't really conducive to like the way you play the game and the way they built out the universe. So it just kind of looks like they have like really dreary, flat, insanely high-res textures on what are obviously just old models. Like, it's lost all of its like cartoony fun flair in favor of looking like a Call of Duty RTS, where it's like unnecessarily realistic fantasy, which is like such a weird amalgam of stuff. And then on top of that, they killed the thing you mentioned. They kind of stabbed it in the face almost, which is the custom game. So they gave you more tools to build more custom maps and stuff, but they put some huge legal flags around and on it that say two main things. One, you cannot use other people's IP in your custom games. So some of the most popular custom games used to be like Lord of the Rings maps were super sick. I played one literally like 2 days ago. Not kidding. I'm still playing Warcraft 3 customs right now. But what it was like a fun little map that simulated the Battle of Helm's Deep, where you play with like 8 other people and you control Legolas and like his archer people, and then someone else controls Gimli and his little battle axe people, and someone else controls like the King of Rohan and his people, and like you all control your like area. And so like maybe you're on the front line of the main wall where like the bomb blows up, or like in the movie, or maybe you're inside the castle on the walls, maybe you're inside the king's chamber, but you all have your roles and your areas you need to cover. And then obviously there's the orc side where there's like 3 orc guys and they have their specialty orc units that they can use. And it's like a big strategy battle, right? And it's like built out in it's like role play universe of Lord of the Rings. Those are very popular. Because of the new like TOS for how custom games work, you're not able to upload and play those on their servers. And you can't, like, they don't have non-public, they don't have, like, you can't host your own server on your computer for other people to play. And you can't go to another group and like pay. Do you remember how you used to be able to pay for like TeamSpeak servers and that kind of stuff? Yeah. And you could like pay for Counter-Strike servers. You can't do that for Warcraft. So you can't go buy servers. You can't build your own server. You can only use the official Blizzard servers. And the struggle there is you can't use any non-IP owned IP that's not owned by you or Blizzard. So all of those custom maps, which is probably like 40% of the custom map community, is people who built like Resident Evil games that were really cool, or 300 roleplay games, or Lord of the Rings games that were super sick. All of those different IP areas got axed. So there's 40% of the games. And then here's the big follow-up. Any custom game you make, any map, any product you build using the engine, which again, they killed the old engine. The old Warcraft 3 engine is now gone. The map editor doesn't exist and you can't run games and the servers don't exist. So for all intents and purposes, you cannot make Warcraft 3 custom maps anymore in the capacity that you could 2 months ago. Like literally the second they flipped the switch, everything's gone, right? The second thing they did was they own everything. Yep. It says it's built in when you buy the game, when you log in, when you create an account, when you buy the game, when you create an account, when you log in, and when you create the map, when you upload the map. At every different layer that you play with, it's got a little like by the way that you're clicking through that says anything you put on here we own. And this is obviously to stop Dota 2 from ever happening again. Yeah. They never want to see, and Legion TD, by the way, Legion TD is another game that literally the exact same thing happened where Blizzard saw it, didn't do anything with it, either stymied the growth of it because like there's limitations on the engine and they weren't willing to be like the developer says, hey, I want to do something cool with my custom game. Can you guys add this functionality? And they're like, that's Warcraft 3. Like, we don't give a shit about that. Or on the new one, they said, yeah, we'll add it. Cool. But now that they've added this, everything that you make with the new Warcraft 3, which again is the only Warcraft 3 now, they own. It's just theirs. It's their product. So you can't auto chess. Same thing that happened with Valve. Valve allowed custom games for Dota 2. Someone made auto chess. Valve came and said, hey, this is really cool. You should come make it for us. We're not going to like give you anything. Like, you don't get to own the product, but we want you to be on the dev team for us making this. And the guy said, nah, I'm literally just going to work with another dev team, and this is my IP now. And they're like, ah. So they made Underlords, which is their version. That's what Dota did. Dota 2 did. Valve did. And then that guy went and made actual auto chess, just called auto chess, I think. And then obviously a bunch of other people made versions, iterating on it, Teamfight Tactics, etc. They like Blizzard really doesn't want to see that happen. They don't want to miss being Dota 2 or League of Legends, and they don't want to miss being auto chess, and they don't want to miss being Legion TD. That's another one. That's a custom game. Legion TD was a custom game for Warcraft that spun off and made its own game called Legion TD. They don't want that to happen anymore. So the second thing they did was anything you make in custom games is now theirs. So if you make a custom game ever and it finds success, even if Blizzard has no interest in doing anything with it, they look at it and say, you made a dumb, like, I don't know, weird racing simulator thing of a game in our Warcraft 3 engine, if you go turn around and you hire a dev team, or you get a dev team to approach you or a publisher to approach you and say, we want you to make this game, and you start doing that, Blizzard can send you a cease and desist and say, oh, sorry, you conceived of that genre, that game in our engine. So therefore, that's ours. So you need to stop making that game because that's ours. We're not making one, to be clear, but you need to stop because we own that property.
Smart.
So that's another 40% of custom games chunked off. There's 80% of the games that people played or wanted, like, were invested in being involved in. So now, like, that entire community just kind of gets shafted. Again, it exists and it's pushing forward and trying as hard as it can, but the games that like lean on other IPs too much can get reported and smacked down. And anything you make in there, you are risking, if it ends up being successful. Like, say you invest 1,000 hours in making a really cool custom game. If it finds any level of real success, Blizzard can just claim it as their own, and they don't have to use it. That's the real tragedy. I think if it at least said like, you can't use it if we use it for something, and we like do it quickly, like if we within 2 years turn around and like turn it into a product, maybe there'd be some arguable justification. Still not really, but maybe. But there's not even that. It literally is just like, you don't own it, so you can't do anything unless we say you can, and we're never gonna say you can because we're Blizzard. Why would we? And that's just like a super feels bad. So that's my tangent on Warcraft 3. I love that game.
I didn't even get to the topic that I want to talk to you about today. And
what is it?
I still have lots of tangents that I want to go on, but we are a little bit over time. So I'm glad. Are you free to chat more next week as well?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm free literally whenever. Hit me up.
Great.
Imagine trying to go to bed, Mark.
With drinking as much caffeine as you're drinking?
Oh, I'm jacked up, dude.
I can tell.
This is my first caffeine in like 6 months. I am wired.
The thing is that like I really really like Wired Danan, but I also like began to actually really really like, you know, calm peaceful Danan as well. And so like it's weird because it's like Wired Danan is coming back with a vengeance, and it's just like even just one can. So I'm excited because
maybe that's why the world's been slow. I just haven't had caffeine in so long.
Well, it's just I know for me, like I've tried for like weeks to like stop caffeine, specifically coffee, and I just get less done. My mind works more slow, and even after like my body adjusts, it's just kind of like, yeah, just like chill, relax. You know, you sleep better. Life is really nice. But then it's almost like the world goes by, and then the second you start like drinking caffeine, you're like you're working at the pace in which the world is actually going. So
yep,
yeah. Cool. Well, good. Thanks.
Are
for,
you gonna tease the topics that you were trying to get to?
No, like, I think the main thing is that I basically just want to talk about like your history and your evolution and the different games that you've been in, different scenes, different cultures. Like, I want it, and it's like a big long thing, which that I feel like at the rate that we're going right now, I have a feeling that we'll get like 6 months into your like right out of college in 6 months, and then we'll do an hour and a half on that basically at this rate.
Oh yeah, for sure. Oh dude, if you ever try to start an origin story, like it's gonna be really doomed because
well, I think it's
I go in detail.
It's less an origin story, but it's more of an excuse to go on tangents, and I think this is the reason why like I wanted to do this in the first place. Well, we talked about this in the beginning. I think like I really wanted to make content in which that was, I think, and I still believe that is valuable to the community. But I think, you know, I'm still waiting to kind of sell other people on getting this to that. But in the meantime, just you are a wealth of knowledge of so many different games. And, you know, I was watching your old videos, and one of them you were saying, you're like, it was 16 games. 16 games you were for Cloud9 that you were GM for. And it's just crazy to, and also with complexity. Like, Complexity is one of the, like Jason Lake, like one of the oldest esports orgs in the entire world. Like that is OG. And then also with Cloud9 as well, like pretty darn OG. And with Dignitas as well, like OG. Like you have been in the belly of the beast of the OG of all esports, or at least North American esports. And so, yeah, you are this, but you're not as public. I think that your connections or your Rolodex is vast and deep, and like anywhere you go in esports, no matter what the game, like it could be Rocket League, it could be like Rules of Survival, like like people and like oh yeah. So but at the same time, you're not as overtly public, either by design or just I don't know whatever. So I don't know.
Half it's got to be laziness. We can definitely argue that I don't want to. Like that was definitely a lot of my pressure. Was like I don't like seeing management be as like publicly accessible and involved. I think it like kind of undermines some of what you're doing.
Yeah.
But some of it's also just like you got to get around to it and you got to like invest time in it. I don't think I like doing that kind of stuff alone. I don't like sitting alone looking at Twitter and figuring out what I should tweet about like a game that I'm in or involved in. I don't like sitting there thinking about what I should tweet or Instagram about a player. Like YouTube content wise, like I don't like the idea of sitting around and being like, what's like a thing I could put on YouTube that would be relevant and interesting that's related to anything that I do or I like. All of that, what I just said, just sounds so dreary and boring. Yeah. But this is great when you're just like, hey, you want to turn on the stream and I'm just going to ask you questions. I'm like, well, yeah, I will sack all of my free time for that for sure. That sounds like a good time.
Well, I think, and I know that you don't like talking. So, I really appreciate you opening up.
Yeah, I just loathe talking. Talking is just the devil for me.
I think like for me, like with esports in a nutshell and then Blitz, like I love doing deep research about people and asking questions in which that haven't been asked that I'm genuinely curious about and like I don't know. And I think with you, what's really fun is that I feel like, I wrote my questions, I did my research, but the fun thing is that you can go down rabbit holes of just vast amounts of information and knowledge. And I think a lot of other people that I talk to, I can research them for anywhere between 1 to 2 weeks and then kind of encapsulate who they are and like have really, really great conversation with them. And then it will be like about a year in order for me to accumulate more information about them.
Enough stuff to talk about more stuff.
Yeah. And I think with you that you're like this giant untapped well of ocean, like it's There Will Be Blood. It's like there's an ocean of oil, and I drink your milkshake. And you've got an ocean of milkshake and I want to drink your milkshake.
Okay.
That's not a euphemism.
It's going into a weird space now.
It's weird. Did I make it weird? Yeah.
It's a good kind of weird though.
Yeah. I will ask one other question and then you can just say no comment of like what GG. We've got 2 games left. Thoughts on not, I guess less about ending this season, but I guess thoughts on how do we, if spring split doesn't matter at all, and it's really summer split that matters. Like, do you think that you are going to make moves, or GG is going to make moves to ensure summer split success?
I think if we see windows where it makes sense, we can. I think we are the team most capable of making moves if we want to. The question we have to answer is, do we want to? I actually think we have a significant amount of pieces that we're happy with. I think our team across the board has, hilariously enough, and again, everyone, I'll get flamed for it, we have underperformed for who we are for damn sure. It is not close. Like when we say scrims to stage, we really mean like we feel like we are a dominant, capable team when the lights are down. For sure, like there is no question. So it's actually kind of challenging when we look at it and say, okay, like we have a really good team. We have to get that like visible and out to the public. But it's concerning when you look at it and say, but changing things could, reset that timer. Like we could be 1 or 2 weeks away from breaking it completely wide open. I actually think we were going to break it wide open until the delay. Yeah. I think the extra week of practice on this patch gave a lot of teams that normally aren't as like quick to pick stuff up like we are time to catch up to us, at the same time that we kind of like lost some momentum. I think we were on a really good run. I think we won like the games that we won we felt good about. The games that we lost, we understood why and felt like we had a really good angle on making sure it doesn't happen again. And then we lost that week. and we just ended up falling flat. I think we had two very, very, very winnable games against TSM and Liquid this last weekend that just didn't end up going our way. But I think if you flip the coin on those games, like we would more consistently win them than we would lose them. But obviously we are in a best of one format, so that justification never really holds up. So it feels bad, obviously, to lose that momentum. But with all that being said, because we feel so good, because we're in such a good spot, it's one of those, we'll make moves if we need to, and we are the most capable team of making moves. Like, if we want to make moves, we can. But we have to be justified in wanting to. We have to see something that's worth going after. I think a lot of teams make moves for the sake of making moves. I think they jump on opportunities they see, not because they genuinely are bought into that idea as like something for solving. I think they just have problems. They don't know how to solve them, and they just make moves to test the waters on maybe this will solve it. We weren't going to solve it ourselves anyway, so we're going to try. I never want to do that. I never want to be in that position where we're just changing things to see if it's going to fix it. I'd like to be purposeful, and I like to be concise in what we change and why we change it. And right now, I'm not convinced like we're in a weird spot where we need to like magically alter things. I think right now, for all intents and purposes, we have spent the entire split being on average one game out of playoffs. Yeah. And actually, we spent the entire split being 2 games out of second place. Like, from a statistics standpoint, we have been right on the edge of being like a top relevant competitive team. And I think we're the second most consistent, dominant early game team with a set of players who arguably everyone said should never be an early game team. Yeah. We are not a team that is supposed to be successful early, and we are dominant early relative to everyone that's not Cloud9. And I think that's really indicative of the fact that if we ever get our mid-late game together in the way that we did our early game, and if we ever get our momentum in a position that we're happy with, we will be a top team immediately. There is no question. And at that point, it is so much easier for our roster to get better faster than other rosters. I think we are way less limited in our capacity to grow. And so all of those factors lead me to say, yeah, sure, we can change something, but we're only going to change something if we need to, if we feel like it makes sense, if we actually have a problem that we're finding a solution for. And I don't think we're like in that position right now. I think we're focused on getting a 2-0 this weekend, angling on a little bit of luck, and trying to earn playoffs. But even then, even if we don't make playoffs, I'm going to make one point here that it kind of sucks that I'm doing it so late. I'm sorry. This is probably like the meat of the conversation. But I want to point something out and be really, 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 really strict on it. I think a lot of people, if we miss playoffs, will say like this is disappointing. I don't think I will ever feel disappointed there's only 2 things that will ever, I think, make me disappointed at Golden Guardians. And I think that would be getting 10th place again. I think that's wholly unacceptable. I don't think there's ever a justification for being 10th place. And then the other thing is, if another team that came into existence through franchising wins a split before we do. And that's a pretty big list of teams that could do it, that just I don't think are going to or aren't particularly close. Now, that would be Evil Geniuses. That would be 100 Thieves. Technically Immortals, yes. Actually, I'll give it to them. Evil Geniuses, 100 Thieves, Immortals,
FlyQuest,
Dignitas. No. FlyQuest was LCS before franchising.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So they had, remember, and the reason I say this is because I think one of the biggest things that teams get propped up in NA on, not like globally, but in NA, teams are propped up on the fact that they had players that they signed on 2 or like 3-year deals while franchising was happening, and that locked out. Like, I would say probably the top like 20 players in the league, almost all of them were locked into contracts before half the teams even existed. So like from like an actually how the league works perspective, and this is why I think a lot of people were obviously very frustrated with like the Bjergsen stuff this last offseason. You can really argue and say all these teams suck. Why are they trying? Fuck Golden Guardians. Fuck Dignitas, or what would have been Clutch. Screw Optic, because none of them are trying. And it's like, okay, cool, but how? Like, from your like strategic perspective, where do you land on the fact that none of those teams have literally ever had access to a significant amount of the player, like the pro player base? Like they've never even been allowed to conceive of working with like a handful of the most elite players, right?
Yeah.
Ever. Like conceptually, it's not even been in their wheelhouse. So you're basically saying, hey, by the way, you need to go win a split in NA, but you can't use any of the top like 15 players. Right? That's like the magic challenge you give the new franchise teams, right? I think like FlyQuest being where they're at, honestly, is kind of unacceptable from like what they could have done or where they should have been. I think they're getting there now, but it feels kind of bad because my estimate when I look at their roster, I guess they spent a lot of money this time around. And they're still like not obviously as dominant as like Cloud9, for example, right? And they're kind of like, I think they're tailing off right now. They're like tied for second or third now. I think when you look at it, I'll feel bad when one of those teams I mentioned, like a new franchise team, wins a split. I think my goal, it's kind of shifted over time. I would love to win sooner, but it's always going to be based on like how's free agency looking and like how is like importing going, what rules are changing. They've changed rules around equity kind of in the middle. Like there's been a lot of like drastic shifts in the landscape of the LCS in a way that I don't think it's as simple as saying, okay, you're a GM for a team. Doesn't matter what team, literally doesn't matter what team, you need to go win a split, you have a year. Well, if like the rules and the landscape change every single year and none of it is favorable towards the new franchise teams, I'm not shocked to see that a new franchise team hasn't just like found that success. Like 100 Thieves got the closest, right?
Yeah.
They spent like year one franchising, they spent either the first or second most amount. I think it was first. And they at least made it to a finals. But I think everyone kind of said there's a timer on how long that team can exist before it explodes. And it did aggressively, right? I think money buys you time. I don't think it outright buys you success. I think a lot of it is also like the network and the connection of being able to bring in those players that are basically inaccessible. And I think EG is like an example of that happening now, right? They spent a lot of money, like an insane amount of money, to get players that previously have never been accessible. Like Sven Skaren has just never been a player anyone could even sign other than TSM and C9. Like he's just like literally you couldn't even get access, right? I think those endemic teams have also smacked back and done the same thing where like Liquid paid an insane amount probably for like Jensen, right? Like those things happening makes it really, really, really challenging, I think, for the new franchise teams to find success. And that's kind of where my headspace is on where we're at and like what we need to do. I would love to win a split. I think our immediate goal is to win a split on a like totally reasonable timeline. I think again, this is probably like a weird way to put it because I guess I'm giving like a self-review of myself instead of reviewing Golden Guardians as a property. But I feel like with what I'm doing and how I'm trying to do it, I feel like it will be more respectable if I can win a split. It makes more sense for me to hold up the standard that I should win a split before the other new franchise teams and less challenge myself to beat Cloud9 immediately.
Yeah.
Like that seems weird. Like, okay, these teams that have existed for a long time, that have tons of assets and have built up this like massive war chest of how they operate in the space. You need to go beat them immediately, right? I think Liquid showed they could do it because they matched having the endemic war chest as well as having like the network and the connection internally to like just go spend money and be an endemic team and bam, you get 4 championships in a row. And I think C9 has shown having the history and having the connection and the awareness that comes from being around for as long as they have can put you in a position to spend reasonably while being dominant. Cool. But I think it's obviously two massive challenges for the new franchise teams like us, where we have to build and try to like navigate this network that is like foreign and not super accessible to us and doesn't want to be accessible to us, while trying not to spend so much money that it defeats the entire point of everything you're trying to do with respect to being fiscally reasonable and scale. That's not to say that we're not down to spend money. Like obviously we got the Warriors behind us. Like I can spend an insane amount of money if I need to do crazy things. I just don't think there's a lot of crazy things that make a lot of sense right now. And so I think we're in a really good spot to be realistic and be functional and maintain the standard of I want to win a split before one of the other franchise teams does.
I think there are two thoughts that
One of
I
the
think,
new franchise teams do.
yeah, that I think about as well with like content and branding. Of how do you make a team relevant and popular when we're not winning championships? And and I think that for me with esports, the things that worked back with esports in a nutshell or Blitz or even like Cloud9 the last couple of years, like it's the same stuff doesn't work anymore as effectively because everyone like the second that you do something in esports, everyone copies it. And and so then you kind of have to get ahead of the curve. So same thing with like competitive, like you have to get at least one step ahead because it isn't the same game. And so I guess my question to you is what do you think that you can do to get one step ahead of everyone else?
I mean, that's interesting. So here's the funny thing. I can't give away too much because that's kind of the secret sauce of what I exist for, right? Like, if I had to like say, like, why did Golden State hire you? Why did Hunter and Kirk believe in you to be the person who could salvage what had happened from year one and believe in you to pave the pathway for making Golden Guardians like a relevant, successful LCS team, LCS property? And I think that they're kind of hand in hand the same thing. What I will say, though, is that I'm confident in my capacity to understand the politics of how the league operates, understand the ebb and flow of like the power dynamics that exist between the league, the developer, the endemic teams that were already here, and the new franchise teams. I'm traditionally very apt at like assessing and maintaining relationships in spaces like that. And I'm actually used to spaces that are more tumultuous, like Counter-Strike and these other unregulated games don't have a lot of stuff that limit you. And so because of that, you are kind of like working on thin ice 24/7. Like anyone can screw something up for you at any time. Being in League is a little bit nicer in that there's like everything's got a timeline and there's a structure and like there's tradition. There's like a system you operate in. But I will say that I think the new franchise teams are inherently at a disadvantage. I think it came as a shock to the teams, but it did not come as a shock to me when, for example, they rolled out the equity rules, the new equity rules, and it said, oh, hey, a player has to play for you for 3 years before you can give them equity. And that was a really interesting thing to conceive of when your team has only existed for 2 years. And you say, oh, maybe it means the player has to be with you for 3 years since franchising, because that's when we all decided, okay, even playing field were franchise, right? And they clarified and said, no. 3 years includes however long you existed, right? So there's like 6 teams in the league that are even eligible to use this. And then if you account for the fact that of those 6 teams, like 4 of them have changed all 5 of their players in the last 2 years, 3 years, there's only like 2 teams that can use this. Like they rolled out a rule that basically said, hey, players can have equity, but only Bjergsen, Sneaky, and like Stixay or something, right? Yeah. That's what they said. They rolled out a rule that basically said players can have equity. Well, just kidding. Bjergsen, Sneaky, and Stixay can have equity is what the rule actually said. And then it said in a year, there's like 10 players that also can get equity, but they're only on like Liquid, TSM, and C9. And then it said in 2 years, another like 20 players can get equity, but it's only players on FlyQuest.
Yeah.
And at the time, maybe that was it. Like just FlyQuest, right? Oh, and Echo Fox would have been when this happened, right?
Rip.
It would have been Echo Fox instead of EG. And then after 3 years, finally, all of you can play by this rule set.
Yeah.
Right? So like that kind of stuff happening, I think a lot of teams don't expect it and aren't aware, and like 100 Thieves goes like, wait, what? And EG especially, EG is the team that gets shafted the hardest because they suddenly get told you are the furthest away from equity. You have no players, so you don't even have a baseline to start at. Golden Guardians at least had contracts at the time. We've had Haunter now for a year, so like we can give Haunter equity in 2 years. We could have given Juan contracts equity at the end of this year. So like we were kind of close, and the other new franchise teams at least had like a couple players. But EG came in and got told, by the way, you need to sign a new roster. Also, a bunch of teams can use equity now or in a year or two. Also, you can't use equity for 3 years, which is like a huge player recruitment tool that's just fucking gone for them, right? Doesn't even exist. Conceptually, they can't plan around that. They can't say, hey, yeah, let's recruit players and tell them in 3 years we'll give them equity, because guess what? There's another regulation in the rule book that says contracts can only be 3 years long. So you can't sign someone on a 4 year and say, hey, after you're here for 3 years, that last year, boom, I'll give you equity, right? You have to say, hey, I'll sign you on a 3 year now. And if you want to stay here, I can maybe offer you equity, but that's a really fucking long ways out, and I can't give it to you now. I'm not allowed. So I can't even put it in the contract. So just come here and trust that eventually I'll negotiate it with you when I can, right? Again, teams are surprised. I'm not. This is the kind of stuff that's my value, right? I was not shocked. I was aware. I knew exactly how we were gonna have to play through it. We talked with the league. I think we were a little bit stricter on the equity stuff because of people like me who were more vigilant on trying to like keep the balance of competitiveness across the board. So I think if you wanted me to point at something and say like, what do you do? That makes you like equipped for that. It's that kind of stuff. Being aware, being vigilant, being proactive, and I care. I care a lot. That's probably one of the bigger things. I think I'm one of the GMs that's most apt at hiring with purpose and feeling confident and being happy with what I'm building out. And I think that goes a long ways when you're building out a new franchise like this.
Thank you for giving me a detailed answer when inherently the answer was flawed, in which that you really couldn't give me like the deep answer that I really wanted, but you still gave me like a really good answer. So anyways, all right, we're gonna end it. Thank you, Danan. Talk to you next week.
Sounds good.
All right. Is there anything else that you want to talk about?
Nothing too much. I need to remember, like maybe next week I will like lead into this with like a stream. I'm trying to think. I might get like a capture card. Do we have an Elgato laying around the office?
Oh yeah, there's like 4 or 5 of them.
I'm
right by
such
the
an
printer.
idiot.
Yeah.
Okay, can I take one?
Yeah.
Are we gonna care? Like, is it gonna be like in 2 weeks I need to bring it back, or
No,
is it
there's
like you might need it
there's like
eventually?
5 or 6 of them. I
God
know.
bless.
Yeah.
I'm gonna steal one because I want to stream Animal Crossing that I'm playing, but I don't have one.
Yeah.
So I'm probably gonna buy like an extra Switch dock so I can have one for my TV and one for my desk, and then I'll grab the Elgato, and maybe I'll like lead into this with some other stuff because I want to get back to streaming and being active.
Yeah.
Depending on how this weekend goes, maybe I'll suddenly be online more than I want to be.
Cool.
Hopefully not. Ideally, we 2-0 Immortals 0-2s. We hit some tiebreaker scenarios. We slide our way into playoffs like we definitely fucking should be. And at that point, I can tell my loyal viewers, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm just really busy with the LCS. That would be nice. But if not, maybe I'll lead in and do something, and maybe I'll talk less next week and I'll wrap afterwards. Like we'll transition into this going into like me playing or doing something else afterwards. So it feels a little bit more like normal and organic. I will also ask really quickly before we go, I'll put the pressure on. Is there any reality where like I could just host the stream? Because like the only problem I have with this is
Your quality.
no, not that. I don't mind that much. My problem actually now is if I wanted to play a game after this, I have to go offline.
Oh.
Because I don't know if there's like a handoff procedure. Like,
I mean,
maybe if I hit start streaming over here, and then maybe if I hit start streaming over here, and then you hit stop streaming, it'll just hand off to me. I don't think that's how it works. So I'm pretty sure
it'll drop for like 5 seconds. So
what if I hit start streaming and I wait like 20 seconds, and then you hit stop streaming? Even if it just says like technical difficulties and then cuts to me, I would accept that. The problem is I don't want it to do the thing where it goes offline.
Yeah.
It goes offline, ends the VOD, and sends out the new notification like I'm live again and annoys everybody again, and resets the viewer count. Like all the like back end stuff happens at once. Like I feel like there's got to be something that you can do to do that. But if there's not, I would prefer then just to host it myself. If it is just the graphic.
I'll just
I don't know if you're doing. I don't know if I just feel bad. Like if you wanted to like implement scene changes, and like when I'm talking, you're cutting to only me a lot, and when you're talking, you're cutting to you, and we have like notification things you're trying to implement. If you're trying to like upgrade the product and add stuff to it,
I see.
Then I would totally prefer to let you handle that. Like keep holding on to it and have fun, because that would be cool. But like if you wanted to like change the topic, like what are we talking about, and it pops up, like if you wanted to live update the broadcast, then absolutely please hold on to that. I'm too fucking lazy to handle that.
Yeah.
But if we're not going to do that, I think it would be better for me, because I could also put my camera on my correct computer, and then I could start the stream earlier and I could end it later without there being like a weird handoff thing.
Yeah, let me think about doing some more like better broadcast just practices to make it a little more interesting. And I think I'll play a little bit more of a technical director than because I don't need to see me like staring down like the camera and just So I think we can play a lot more with that. So let me try.
I like to be clear, I like our current set. I like the like me and you both on camera, like we're good. I was just saying, if you are trying or wanting to implement like interactive lower thirds, or upper thirds that like show our topic, or you have more you wanted to do on the like what is the production side, I guess, then have at it go ham. But if not, like it probably makes sense for me to stream just so I can lead in and lead out.
I'm down for either. I'll try playing next week, and if not, we'll switch over.
That's good.
All right. Well, I'm glad that stream got to hear about that.
And that's me just generally
did
speaking.
Did you want to, are you ready to start streaming something else now, or are you talking about for
No. Oh, no. We've gone. Beth
Way
is, okay, wait, real quick. We are actually going to get divorced if this is a weekly thing that requires 2 hours. This is insane. I sent her a heart back. She's now going to send me a very, very irate message about the fact that I read her message on broadcast.
All right, so we're going to end at 8 o'clock every week starting next week. All right, bye.
No, we're good. I mean, I'm just going to be playing video games otherwise. We're chilling.
All right, bye.